is the most rational or logical position belief in Christianity? Is it truly rational and logical to believe in Christianity out of all the other religions? Well, that's what C.S. Lewis would seem to put forth in his book Mere Christianity, and that is what I hear a lot coming out of debates between atheists and theists, Christians. There's a lot of this throwing around of terms of, well, I just arrived here because of the data, or the evidence of the resurrection it leads me to be here, or the scientific answers for the creation of the universe, or the fine-tuning argument, they're not enough for me. And maybe you've heard a lot of those too. And something never sat quite right with me, and those conversations tended to frustrate me. And I think I figured out why. So the next question that leads out of this is one question that will end all debates, in my opinion, between atheists and Christians. Asterisks. Rational Christians, okay? So this is what you do. This is my personal belief, okay? Sit down with someone. They can be the most seasoned Christian out there, most crazy theologian. Pick any of them. Sit them down in front of me. Apologist, whatever. I wouldn't even begin to address any moral argument, which so often things tend to devolve into. I wouldn't even begin with trying to address any sort of problem of evil, or how do you justify this God being this, or how do you account for all these big questions, right? That a lot of people seem to wrestle with. I would start with something so simple. I would simply ask the person I'm talking to, I'd say, hey, about the story of Jesus' birth, I just want to know what you believe. I do. I really do want to know what you believe. There's so many denominations, so many different beliefs. I'm curious. And this, I think, will help me understand where you're coming from and kind of what you believe. Do you believe that Jesus, that his parents, Mary and Joseph, had to go back to their hometown because of a census, and that when they were going back to their hometown, they were looking for a place for little baby Jesus to be born, and there was no room in the inn, and so they went to a stable and laid him down in a manger, because there's no room in the inn. Is that what you believe? Now, depending on their answer, it tells me absolutely everything that I need to know about that individual and their belief system, right? Because critical scholarship, which is academics who study the Bible, it's the critical study of the Bible, not critical as in negative, but critical as in I'm going to read the Bible and figure out what's going on. I'm going to go back to the oldest manuscripts. I'm going to just dig into all of the culture around it. It's the study of the Bible, the academic study of the Bible, okay? If they answer no, then I know that they are well-read in critical scholarship. And at that point, I don't even think they would be having a debate with me, which is why I say that this is the one question that would end debates, okay? Now, if they answer yes, I would then explain myself and say, well, that's interesting to me because the academic consensus of the Bible, that means a bunch of people who are smarter than either of us, who've dedicated their lives to studying the Bible, who oftentimes know Greek, Hebrew, Aramaic, and Babylonian sometimes, they don't read translations of the Bible, they read the earliest manuscripts of the Bible written in the language it was originally written in. No mistranslations, no interpretations, just as it was. And they have the cultural context. They know about the northwestern Semitic tribes. They know about Mesopotamian laws, the laws of Hammurabi. They know all of these cultural surroundings as well. They know the history. Those are the people we're dealing with, okay? What do they have to say on the topic? Well, what they have to say is no. It is a mistranslation to believe that Jesus and his family, there was no room in the inn. That's the mistranslation. The words in the original language are referring to there was no room upstairs in the home they were staying at. And so they went downstairs to where they kept the animals, and Jesus was laid in a manger. So that part of the story isn't true. And that's the part of the story that broadly Christians believe. Another thing is, it's also widely accepted that that census never took place. Why? Because we have the Roman censuses at the time, and that one doesn't exist. The second piece of evidence we have is that this census doesn't make sense to have people return to their home, where they were born, their birth state or their birth area, just for the census. There's never been a census conducted that way, and they don't do it that way because it doesn't make sense logistically. It would cause a significant disruption at a societal level, and they wouldn't want to do that. And the third reason that this most certainly did not happen, right, is the mistranslation of the whole story I'm talking about broadly here, right, of how we know that, hey, we don't have a census for that. They wouldn't do a census logically for that. There's the mistranslation of Jesus not going to an inn. And I think lastly, the last evidence that could be provided for it would probably have to be that Matthew, right, where the story, kind of a lot of details come into place here, is known for making things up. It's provable, but that's probably where you'd run into hot water, so I might stay away from that. Let's just focus on, and I say make things up. He makes up prophecies that don't exist in the Hebrew Bible that Jesus is fulfilling based on, ironically, another mistranslation. Now, I'm saying all of this, right, and you might already be getting lost in the sauce here, right, but I would bring all of this up and I'd say, look, that's what scholars believe, and that's one example, and I bring it up because it's not very threatening to you. We can still accept what the consensus has to say, what these very smart people have to say, and it's not a threat to your ideology and your religion and your beliefs, right? I can still believe in Jesus Christ as the Savior of mankind, and I can still believe in my religion, and so it's not referring to an inn, it's referring to the house he's in, and he just went downstairs. So that part of the story, okay, not true, right? And that's where I would maybe push on you a little bit. I'd say, well, it turns out that that's not the only case where we see little differences in what Christians believe broadly and what is actually in the text. Another example would be Jesus healing the lepers. I recently found this one out, that the term leprosy was a mistranslation there, and that this story, and that affects the story. You grew up hearing about he healed lepers and leprosy. I remember my Sunday school teachers telling me, explaining what leprosy is to me, and I'm like, wow, and he healed them. And I remember thinking, how could they not come back and thank him? And I believe, from what I can remember, and you could correct me if I'm wrong. If I'm wrong, then I'm wrong. But from what I remember is it's actually a ritual impurity that he went and he cleansed them of. Not anything to do with the actual disease leprosy. There's a ton of other small examples that I could probably point to as well regarding different little things about the story of Jesus and how they've been mistranslated and picked up here and there. I think the one that I would focus on last, though, would be the long ending of Mark. So we know that in the earliest manuscripts that we have of the Bible, right, these should be the most reliable. The least amount of people have messed with them, have added to them, have translated them. The ending of Mark isn't there as we have it today, as you most likely have it in your most likely KJV Bible. Why? Well, turns out we can point to the exact date when a scribe or someone decided to write in the ending of Mark, the long ending of Mark. Why would they do that? Probably to fulfill their own theological needs, but also to maybe align it better with the other stories. But when it comes down to it, that didn't exist in Mark. And Mark is our earliest gospel manuscript that we have. I think another one that you could probably play on too is you could ask him, do you believe that Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John wrote Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John? Because they didn't. We have no evidence for it. You could also say, do you believe Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, if they did write it, do you think that they were eyewitnesses to Christ? First-hand witness accounts. Well, they weren't. So those are things that I feel like are a lot of beliefs and dogmas Christians hold, and it turns out that there's no actual data for any of that. There's no supporting evidence, and there's actually data against it. This all coming from the scholarly consensus. So, at this point, you're going to get some pushback, okay? Now, the pushback is going to be one of two things. It's going to be, well, there are some scholars who say otherwise, okay? The second pushback you're going to get is, well, why would I believe in a bunch of scholars? The Bible isn't meant to be analyzed scientifically. It's the Word of God, right? I'm not going to believe in a consensus of scholars who are of the world. So those two things, they're either going to appeal to a scholar that agrees with them, or they're going to try and discredit it altogether. And here's how you refute that, right? You say, okay, let's take the first example of, well, other scholars disagree. So this is what is known as an appeal to authority fallacy, right? This idea of, well, this other scholar who's above me disagrees with that, and he's smarter than both of us, so why would I listen to what you're saying other scholars believe? Sounds like you're just choosing the atheistic view of the Bible. Now, the pushback on that is, look, I'm not picking a specific scholar to listen to. What I'm doing is I'm saying, look, the way that the system's set up is that all of these incredibly intelligent people who've dedicated their lives to studying the Bible and the context and culture around the Bible, they can submit papers offering their arguments for different interpretations of what they believe the text is saying and what they believe were the original texts and things such as that. And they can provide their own evidences. And then their peers can review those papers that they write, and they can either find that convincing or find it not convincing. So when I say the academic consensus, what I'm saying is this is the view, this is the argument that is held by the overwhelming majority, the vast majority of scholars of the Bible, okay? We're not talking 50, 60%, the overwhelming majority. You're always going to find people in a field anywhere who will take any position, especially medical field, scientific field. There's always going to be a couple people on the fringes. There's always going to be the people peddling their own supplements. There's always going to be people on the fringes. But the safest bet, right, logically, rationally, is to go with the consensus. This is the argument that has convinced the most people. It's the argument that seems the most plausible to the most amount of people. And these people, by the way, they aren't all just atheists. These are people who come from differing religions. You have Jews and Christians and atheists. You have people who, these people have deliberately tried to set aside their dogmas to do this research. These are people who are doing the research, not you or me. These people actively are doing this every day. They know so much more than you and me. And so to appeal to the widest number of them who say something is right, is your safest bet, unless you yourself are going to delve in and become your own scholar and then hold whatever opinion you like. But what we're talking about is just your everyday debater, your everyday friend, the person that you're watching on YouTube, the podcaster who's arguing, right? They're not going to do that. They don't do that. And interestingly enough, you don't see scholars engaging in those kinds of debates, and it's for a reason. It's because they hash things out in their papers, in their peer-reviewed papers, and they present them to the academy. So I hear what you're saying, where there are some scholars who disagree, but the most logical, rational thing to do is to listen to what most of the scholars think is correct. And this is not just true of the Bible, right? This is true of every single area in the world. And you believe the consensus of every area in the world, by the way. You have to operate that way. We have everyone specializing in everything from engineers and scientists. Here's an example. We have specialists, right, who specifically specialize in eye care, they can freaking laser your eyeball and make you see. Now, you can distrust science all you want, but the fact that we can do that we can put you in a chair and burn parts of your cornea, and then suddenly you can see better, that is evidence in and of itself. If we want to get biblical here, that is the fruits of scientific advancement and of consensus. The fact that everyone who works in this, in order to build that technology, you have to accept what other people have done, the work other people have put forth. I can't just rely on doing it from scratch. So that's my point, is the way that you operate in life is completely predicated upon consensus views of specializations. This involves technology. This involves history. This involves really every aspect of your life. Another fun example that I had thought of was this microphone. How do you know that the way that this microphone works is that Satan is in this microphone? And I talk into it, and he sends devils down the wire into my computer, this ancient technology that the government has been hiding from us because they discovered it and was given to them from hell. And I'm using this microphone and Satan to get into your brain and tear down your faith, right? Or, I mean, I'm sure that's a theory as an idea out there. Or maybe I accept like what the vast majority of electricians and scientists and engineers believe, which is that there's electrical currents, and the fact that we can reproduce these and show the electrical currents, and there's data and scientific papers to back it up that show that it can go into a computer. Here's the factory that creates the microchips. It doesn't come from hell. Well, I mean, maybe it's hell for the people working in the factory, but it comes from these people working in the factory who make these tiny little inscriptions, and they operate these machines to make your computer. So that's what I'm saying is when we really get down to it, anyone can throw shade at anything, but it is so stupid to do that you're going to end up pretty much completely nihilistic and crazy if you just choose to not believe anything anyone has ever said. You have to operate on some form of faith and trust in essentially science and what the group of professionals believes. Now, it is true that this has been wrong in the past, right? Science has gotten things wrong, but it continually iterates and improves and gets better. And there's evidences of that with our improvement in life, and medical and scientific advances. All of these things don't indicate that we're currently wrong. It indicates that we are constantly shifting towards more accuracy. So, with all of that huge word vomit blurb out of the way, right? That is why it is silly to appeal to a singular scholar, unless you yourself are the scholar and you can break down your own argument and then you can hold your own belief. But you don't. Okay? So, that's why we appeal to the academic consensus, so that you can live your life without going crazy and without making your obsession the Bible. Now, to address the second argument, right, of, okay, well, why would I trust scholars? I think I already accidentally did that with this idea of, look, you have to trust everything in your life to some degree, to some form of a consensus. And the further away you get from that, the more detrimental and provable the consequences are, right? So, for example, those who mistrust vaccines, we've watched the consequences of that being that some of their children have developed diseases that were thought to be extinct, and they have either died or been hospitalized because of them. And that hasn't been happening for, a decade, because we've eradicated that disease thanks to vaccines. So that would be an evidence to say, hey, the further I get away from trusting the consensus, the more off I can become. All right. So that is why you should believe in the consensus. And just because I understand the gut feeling of saying, I don't believe in it, because it feels like a threat to you, right? This is religion. This is your sacred space. This is your identity. This is your God. But it's okay. We can take a deep breath, and we can explore this with curiosity, and we can say, interesting, I didn't know that. I want to know more about what the Bible actually says. I don't want to know what I don't want to believe in falsehoods. So, with that one question, all the way back to the beginning, right? I'm not getting into any ethical debate. I'm not getting into any weird debate about how many witnesses is necessary for Christ's birth, historicity. I'm not getting into any sort of like whether or not the stories are true or false even. All I'm pointing out to you is that some of these stories have inaccurate elements in them provably. And I'm doing it in a way that shouldn't be threatening to your theology, which is hence the very basic question of what do you believe about Jesus' birth? And then the follow-up questions, if you'd like. So, why would I do all of this? Well, because this question helps you figure out who you're dealing with. If after that initial question and the explanation, the person doesn't take a step back and go, okay, that's a good reason to believe in the scholarly consensus, and you know what? I think you've convinced me that, okay, if that's what the consensus is saying, then my Bible might be wrong. And that is what is important, is being able to show the other person that what you have grown up believing your whole life was wrong. And when we open the doors to that and say, look, turns out, your pastors or your church or whatever your beliefs are was a little wrong, would you like to know what else there is out there? It's this way of, I'm no longer arguing with someone who's like, the Bible's 100% correct. I'm no longer arguing with someone about, no, like, well, God has to be this way. And then I give them like well, what about the slavery in the Bible? And then they have to wiggle their way around why it's okay. Instead, now the conversation is shifted to, hey, like, this is like the core of what the book says. I think a really good way to illustrate this to someone as well would be, look, like, when it comes down to what you choose to believe, you're believing your English version of the Bible, right? The KJV, or whatever one, but I just choose the KJV because I know it's a popular one. If parts of it were wrong, wouldn't you want to know? Like, if someone, since the time it was written, added on to it, wouldn't you care about that? Wouldn't you want to know who that was, what they added to it, and why? Now, some people, some apologists in response to this might say, well, those are just restorations from an oral history that was being passed down, meaning that people were telling these stories, some of the stories got written down, and then some people said, well, not all the story was written down, let me add on. Well, the likelihood of that not being written down the first time is low, but also the likelihood of you remembering it correctly, that oral tradition not getting distorted, because the late ending of Mark is hundreds of years after it was written. To think that isn't getting distorted. And I can show you the manuscript where it's written into the margins, the long ending of Mark. Who wrote that and why? And if we're really going to say that it's a restoration of oral tradition, how are you any different from some of these modern-day religions of Jehovah's Witnesses and Seventh-day Adventists and Mormons? Joseph Smith claimed to be restoring parts of the Bible that were lost. How do you know? Why are you... And it's funny because you know more about Joseph Smith and the Jehovah's Witnesses founder and the Seventh-day Adventist founder. I believe is a woman who claimed revelations as well. I mean, these people are claiming supernatural revelations from God. The dude who wrote it in the margins is an unnamed author of history. You have no idea who it was. Was it a man? Was it a woman? Why did they write it down? What oral tradition were they doing? How come no one fixed it for hundreds of years and it was wrong that whole time? Why did that person feel like they should fix it? Why are you putting so much trust into that one random person? And why are you putting so much distrust into these other religions, which I know you have not investigated? Why do I know that? Because I obsess about these things. And I'm talking, I served a 2-year mission for my church. I'm very involved in theology. I got 2 shelves on my bookshelf just dedicated, one to critical scholarship and one to theology. I've listened to thousands of hours of podcasts on this. I mean, I know that you most likely have not investigated those other religions, because I haven't. And I am probably a little more skewed to the neurotic side of investigating these things. Do I want to in the future? Sure. But I think it's a very rare, small subset of people who have. So, posing this question to you once again, why do you choose to believe them, that those additions to the Bible are wrong, because they're, for whatever reason, the 1900s, but the addition in the 400s or the 1400s is okay? Or the mistranslation, or the addition that they put in the King James Bible, or from the Bishop's Bible or whatever, like, how do you know that that's okay? So, we're really getting at the core here of, look, I'm just showing you what the Bible actually says and how it differs from your beliefs. And once you realize that, I'd like to show you that, so once I show you that, hey, your beliefs are wrong, I'd like to show you, like, why we believe that it is wrong. And I can challenge you by that line of questioning if you're going to go apologetic and still kind of go back and try and defend your faith. So now, with that one question and the follow-ups here, I haven't engaged in, I'm not debating you, right? This is me listing out the facts and why we should believe in consensuses and what the consensus says. And then a couple of, I call them thought stoppers. I've addressed some thought stoppers because people like those. It's what we put out when we don't want to think about something because it's making us uncomfortable. So, in my opinion, right, when I'm watching these debates online and I see them getting so lost in the weeds, I just get so frustrated because if either of them were a little more versed in critical scholarship of the Bible, this debate would not be happening. I mean, I just watched a debate between Alex O'Connor and Cliff Nettle, or however you say his last name, and like Alex knows a little bit of critical scholarship, but he doesn't really push Cliff on it, and Cliff just asserts blindly the Bible does not contradict itself, and it is inspired, and it is univocal, meaning it all agrees with itself. But he doesn't address the fact that, like, these things that Cliff most certainly believes are based on traditions. They're based on things that didn't actually happen in the text. They're based on a lack of cultural and contextual understanding. And we should go back to and depend on and rely on academics to tell us what it says, rather than getting lost in the weeds ourselves. So that is kind of what was going on in my brain, was I just feel like any understanding on either part, if I was the atheist, I could better put forth, I would just press him on critical scholarship. And if I was the believer, I would have to, I know that there are critical scholars who still believe, so I know that if I was the believer and I knew this stuff, I wouldn't really be debating you. I'd have to go about it a different way, because frankly, at the end of the road that is critical scholarship, your belief in Christianity is so far removed. It looks so different from what modern day Christians believe that it is not even, it's almost a different religion, because there's so many differences. Like I said, once we start getting into the weeds, okay, well, turns out the Jesus birth story isn't true. Turns out that he didn't heal the 10 lepers. Turns out that the ending where he gets resurrected in Mark, okay, wasn't really written in there. Turns out the contradictions are probably actually contradictions. Turns out the story of doubting Thomas most likely didn't happen because it only occurs in one of them. Turns out that all the letters and some of the epistles Paul wrote, not all of them, but some of them weren't written by Paul. Turns out that the ones that were misogynistic weren't written by them, so I can't really use that to prop up my ideology about women. Suddenly, you really start breaking down what is known as today's modern Christianity, or right-wing Christian nationalism, right? Whew, deep breath. 27 minutes, right? You know, it's better than 2 hours of fruitless arguments back and forth. The last thing that I'm going to address here is, can personal experiences be trusted over data and consensus? So once you get someone to this point where, you know, we've kind of gotten them to admit some things are wrong, we've gotten them to critically think about, you know what, yeah, I don't know why I trust these people. I don't know why I believe this. You know what, that's a good point. That does seem wrong. That doesn't line up. We've gotten them to question. We've gotten them to open up, right? Not just defending these dogmas. They're going to most likely resort to the personal experience that they have. And this is true in my case. I remember talking with someone. I'm going to keep almost all details about them confidential, but I was talking with a very close person in my life, and I was talking to them about critical scholarship in the Bible, and they just very quickly early on in the conversation, they just started asserting it doesn't matter to me. The history of it doesn't matter to me. It doesn't matter to me who wrote it or why they wrote it or when they wrote it or what's wrong with it. It doesn't matter, because I've prayed about it, and God has told me what's true and what isn't true about this story, and what is, and about Jesus Christ and who he is. I know what's true and what isn't. I don't care what's written in there, and I don't care if it's wrong. I don't care if it was mistranslated, because I know it's true, because I pray to God. Now, this is how I should have gone about it at the time. At the time, I hadn't really thought through how I would address this, and now I kind of have. So can personal experience be trusted over data and consensus? I would argue, and this is how I would kind of set up the conversation, is look, right? Your lived experience, okay? Let's take a step away from that, and let's go back to early humans, okay? Early sapiens, hunter-gatherers. Now, if one of them went down to a river before a hunt and dipped his spear in the water, pulled the spear out, and then they went on the hunt and they killed a mammoth, and their tribe of people was fed for a week. And so then every hunt afterwards, that personal experience, right, of that war chieftain, he then tells everyone, hey, before hunts, we dip our spears in the river for success, because our best and greatest hunt that saved our tribe, that saved our family, that provided us food, was when I did this, right? And that's why they do it. Does that make it true? Is there actually something about the river making the wood and the stone wet that makes it more likely for them to kill the animal? Now, you could probably be annoying and sit there and argue and get lost in the weeds. Well, what does true mean? Well, what does this mean? But no. The answer is no, okay? We can all just be, look, okay, that correlation does not mean causation. Just the fact that you did that doesn't mean that that's why you were successful. I'm sure there's plenty of hunts you go on where you dip it in the water and it doesn't work. But we've shown, so that's the old example. We've now shown that we can do this to animals, where we set up experiments where, hey, like, if you do X, Y, or Z, we give you this reward. And the pigeon will learn, or the rat will learn, hey, if I run up this hill and then push the button, or if I do this and then push the button, if I do a flip and then a roll and then push the button, I get food. There's nothing inherently about the rolling and pressing the button that gets you food, but it's the fact that you did that and then press the button to give you food that suddenly it's like, no, the process is I roll and then I push the button and then I get food. I'm going to give one more example. It's the whole idea of, like, I'm following my grandma's recipe. She always chops off the end of the cake, and, like, that's how she does it, and for whatever reason it makes the perfect cake. And I'm not going to think about it. I just follow the recipe. And then it turns out finally we get to ask Grandma when we get to heaven, and she goes, oh, I just cut off the ends because it didn't fit in the oven in my baking pan, so I would cut off the ends. It's like, oh, turns out it didn't have anything to do with it, but that's just what I believed. So I think all three of those examples really illustrate this idea of how things can just get misconstrued. We can misinterpret what previous people have done before us as, okay, well, that's it. We can misconstrue events that actually happen to us and ascribe them to things. I mean, people do this all the time with, this is my lucky charm, these are my lucky shoes, this is my lucky baseball bat. It's programmed into our nature as human beings. It co-evolved with us. So just because you have a personal experience, we know about, and this is, I'm not even getting into religion yet, about anything, doesn't mean it's true, right? I think I run into this a lot in my life with, I have some family members who are very much, they believe that if you get sick, it's based entirely upon your diet, okay? And so if you ate unhealthy, or if you start feeling sick and you happen to have a cupcake earlier that day, well, my cold is because I ate the cupcake earlier. When really, the gestation period for a cold is about a week, and it could be like, okay, a week ago, who was I in contact with? But human beings don't do that. We don't associate events that are so far away with what is currently happening. Instead, we want to look for immediate things. I think another one would be if I was around someone who had a cold earlier today, and then later at night I start to feel a scratchy throat, I would be like, oh my gosh, it's that stupid idiot at the gas station. But that's not the gestation period for a cold. Gestation period meaning the waiting period where I'm exposed to germs and how long it takes for me to get sick. So we do this all the time. And so who's to say that my experience with God, or my answer from God, or my personal experience isn't just one of those things where I'm incorrectly ascribing something to him. I say a prayer and then I go outside and I hear a song that I haven't heard for 20 years, and the song says, just trust, just believe. And then I go, oh my gosh, that was God. When really it could have actually just been a coincidence. I'm just ascribing to this event. So I think just on its face right there, we have a bunch of evidence, scientific, provable evidence, and historical evidence, and just logical, rational evidence, all pointing towards the fact that personal experiences cannot be trusted. We misremember things, we misascribe things, we misread things. So humans, I don't know how we ended up doing this, but we created the scientific method. This is a way to prove what we think might be going on. I think this was evident. I mean, back in the day, they did bloodletting. Let me let out the sickness inside of you. I'm going to bloodlet you. And we now know that that's wrong, but why? Well, because we started testing things. We go, okay, rather than just agree with everyone who came before me rather than just accept that that's how it is. Let me test this. Let me prove this. And then, is it repeatable? And then, okay, is it repeatable for more people than just me? And if it's true, if it comes back as yes for all of those, then okay, you know what? This is true. And that's how we've moved forward as human beings. That's how we assess what is true in every other domain in life, is we want data, we want evidence. We're hesitant of people's radical personal experiences, as we should be. We are... like things such as that nature, we just inherently know. But when it comes to religion, suddenly everyone forgets that, and we let our walls down, and we go, well, okay, but it's religion, so I'm going to believe what my grandma says, of course. The problem is it's not repeatable. It doesn't work for everyone. It's not consistent, and the data don't point towards it. There are so many different religions, so many different beliefs. One person prays to find their keys, they find them. One person doesn't. One person prays to be delivered from being trafficked, and they receive no deliverance. I'm reminded of the Jew who wrote on the walls in the concentration camp, if God is real, he'll have to beg for my forgiveness. Like, if God comforted people, why wouldn't he comfort those? So there's things such as that nature where, when it comes to personal experiences, I don't think that it's rational or reasonable to say we can trust personal experience over data. And I know it's hard because you're so inclined to, oh, well, this worked for me. But I feel like if we just take a step back and we get out of ourselves for a second, we can really come to realize, well, I see the flaw in that. I see how that hasn't worked for human beings, and that actually kind of results in bad crap happening. And I think a lot of people just know this at their core, and they know it's such a big threat to religion. They don't want to let you finish this thought. They don't want to acknowledge the thought, but it's there and it's real. And I think that that's why personal experience is actually a pretty bad thing to rely upon when it comes to, even just being able to trust your senses. I think I'm going to leave you with one last thought, and then I got to be done. The last thought is we evolved, and evolution did not necessarily, it's survival of the fittest, not survival of the truest, not survival of the rational, not survival of the logical. There's nothing in the process of evolution that dictates that something has to evolve for truth, to be capable of rationality. And so everything that you think is true or rational or logical, you can't actually know if it is, because we've not evolved to be that way. That's not how evolution has been observed. Evolution is actually consistently things evolve that don't make sense. Why did that evolve? Because, well, why do we have appendixes? Why did our foot evolve this way? How come, there's so many things that it's like, well, it turns out that's pointless, but it just happened to be there, or that ended up regressing into that. And it seems that the indicator isn't how much truth that creature is capable of understanding, but rather other factors. How big is that creature? How much food does it need? Is it a predator? Can it kill things? Is it fast? Is it smart? Not can it detect truth? Is it actually a logical being? Okay, then it's going to rise to the top. So that was always an interesting thought experiment to me as well, as we weren't actually evolved to identify truth, and we're not actually rational beings. And I think this is supported by the evidence of we are emotional creatures at our core, and we don't reason rationally, and we're very sensitive to biases and dogmas. We're also very sensitive to priming, to those kinds of things. Me preparing ideas and feeding them to you in a certain way at a certain time, and you're more susceptible to them, rather than me judging the idea completely to be truthful or not, based solely on rational, logical thought. So, and there's plenty of things that prove that, plenty of really cool studies to dive into. But like I said, we got to be done. Thank you for watching this video. It was a very fun topic to talk about. I actually originally recorded this one time. This is the second time through. I was like, I'm going to be more concise, have my thoughts more put together. And I actually think I went for twice as much time, so that's fun. But anyways, thank you all for watching. Hopefully I can upload a little more frequently here. I did have to take somewhat of a break, but I'm doing well. And thank you again for watching.